have a pretty eclectic amp selection, full of the standards that you want to see in every studio, plus some stuff that I'm sure you've never seen before. Starting with this Roland Jazz Chorus 77. If you don't know about the Roland Jazz Chorus, it's arguably the best clean sound one can achieve. Highly sought after, and you've heard it on so many records like Sublime, Metallica, Foo Fighters, you name it. Now Roland makes a few jazz chorus models, the most famous being the 120, which is a 212. This is the 77, which is a 2.8 speaker. They are the same heavy-duty transducer speakers that are found in the 120, but they're just 8-inch speakers instead of 12-inch speakers. Now, part of the reason the Roland Jazz Chorus is so coveted is because of its built-in reverb, but also chorus, where you have variable options. You have a fixed, which is obviously just a fixed chorus. It's a preset chorus that Roland makes. But you also have a manual where you can control the rate and depth of the chorus. Even though the jazz chorus is known for its clean sound, it actually has a really cool distortion as well that is different than any distortion that at least I could achieve with any of my other amps. Additionally, you have a high and low input. And one thing that I really love is you have a high treble knob and just a treble knob. So it allows you to dial in the sound a little bit more. Let's check it out. Next is my Hot Rod DeVille.
My name is Rod, and I like to party.
And in my opinion, this is often an overlooked amp because a lot of people want the deluxe, they want the Princeton. I prefer amps that break up a little bit more personally, and so my ear really gravitates to the Hot Rod because it does the Fender clean sound in my opinion, but it also has a drive channel that just breaks up very nicely. This amp has 2 inputs, which I always find is a unique feature that Fender does. Equipped with GT6L6 tubes and 2 Type A Celestion speakers. It has 2 channels and each channel has 2 types. On the clean you have a normal and a bright, and on the drive you have a standard and a more drive. And you cannot overlook the reverb that Fender amps are famous for. Now this is an amp that I'm sure most of you have never seen before, if any of you have ever seen before. This is a Framus Ruby Riot in beautiful red Tolex. And honestly, the only reason I am even familiar with this amp is because I used to work with Framus. What I love about this amp is that it's a 2-channel amp. In the clean side, they kind of advertise it as an AC30 type sound. But then your lead side, that's like a JCM 800, 900. And I have to say, it's pretty accurate to that description. The clean has very nice bright cleans, but breaks up really nicely when you add volume, and the dirty side gets really heavy for a 212 combo amp. Now, as I just said, this is a 212, and one thing that's also really cool is you have a vintage 30 and you have a Celestion greenback. Those are probably my favorite speakers ever, and so it's really nice to have them both equipped in one amp. This amp also has a great reverb, but one cool thing thing is with the effects loop in this amp, there's actually a switch on the top that is an effects mix. So you can actually change how much effects you're getting from your pedal board through this amp. This specific one is equipped with JJEL84 tubes, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention the quality of this amp. Everything from the Tolex to these leather handles, everything is done with such great craftsmanship. This thing is a monster, so let's check it out. This is my Vox AC30, and an AC30 is probably one of the most recorded amps of all time. This thing has legendary breakup. Like all AC30s, this is a 212 amp, and this specific one is equipped with 2 greenback Celestion speakers as well as EL84 tubes. This amp makes it easy to get a great tone. It does have 4 inputs. It has a high and a low and a normal and a top boost. But besides that, on the normal inputs, you have 1 knob, and that's volume. So more or less, and it is predetermined what your EQ is. But on the top boost, you have volume, treble, and bass. As well as this amp features a reverb and a tremolo, which are 2 really cool features. And lastly, you have a master setting which controls tone cut and volume. Hence why this thing is so freaking loud. Check it out. This is the Little Bastard by a small company called Rock and Roll Amps, and I was not familiar with this company, but I went to Carter Vintage one day here in Nashville looking for an amp. During that trip, I tested this amp out and I was blown away by how it sounded. Especially on open chord stuff, it just is so massive and really full. Now what's really cool and unique about this amp is that you have a plexi setting and a tweed setting. And so basically you kind of have 2 amps in one. One that's supposed to replicate a Fender Tweed and one that's supposed to replicate a Marshall Plexi. And you can blend those 2 amps as much as you'd like or as little as you would like, and it gives you a really cool, unique sound. Additionally, you have a normal mode and a girth mode, as well as a standard and a British distortion mode. I love this thing, and I hope you do too. This is a Marshall JCM 900 high gain dual reverb. I personally love the 900s. Obviously the 800s are great, but I really like the higher gain, higher output amps. And this is just a little bit more than the 800 gives you stock. This is a simple 2-channel amp, and basically you have gain and more gain. You can get a pretty clean sound by rolling back the volume on your guitar. That gives you this nice edge of breakup sound that Marshalls are legendary for. Each channel has its unique master, volume, and gain settings, and it has a master setting for your presence, treble, mid, and bass. Here it is. The Dual Rec by Mesa is my favorite amp ever, and I've had this one longer than any other amp I own. This is the foundation of basically every song I have ever recorded. I love the modern gain and all the modern features, but it's also not as tight as some of the newer high gain amplifiers or even Mesa's Mark series amps. This amp has a ton of bells and whistles. It is 3 channels. It has a clean setting and 2 distortion settings. Each channel has a variable sound. On the clean setting, you have a clean and a pushed, and on the distortion settings, you have a raw, vintage, and modern. As well, each channel has variable wattage. You have a 50 watt feature and a 100 watt feature, which is really nice. For home, I keep it on my 50 watt. I don't need 100 watts in here. But on stage and live, I definitely go to 100 watts. Additionally, on the back, we have a bunch of features like tube tracking, the difference between spongy and bold. And what's great about the Mesa Dual Rec is that you can use 6L6 or EL34 tubes. This specific one has Mesa branded 6L6 tubes. And one thing I love about Mesa tubes is that they're already biased and all that. So you can literally just drop them in and not have to do any work on the back end. This is the Fender Tone Master, and these have become increasingly popular over the last 10 years. And after owning one of these, I have to say I understand why. This has ended up on a lot of songs and records that I have done. Now, it is a 2-channel amp, but I have to say, as of right now, I have only used channel 2. I've played with channel 1, but I've only recorded and really gravitate towards channel 2. However, both channels have a fat and normal mode, as well as channel 2 has an A and a B mode, which is just kind of more or less gain. It has JJ 6L6 tubes in it, and one really unique feature about this amp is that both channel 1 and channel 2 have unique effects loops. So you can have effects loop just for channel 2 as well as just for channel 1, which is pretty interesting. I have to say I love this cream Tolex. It's different so it stands out, but it's classy so it still looks good on stage. Last but certainly not least is my Marshall Signature Lemmy Murder 1. I love this amp. I'm a massive Lemmy fan, and I believe only 800 of these were ever made, and so it is very precious to me. So obviously Lemmy is a bassist, but I predominantly use this as a guitar amp. I've recorded bass with it as well, and it sounds fantastic for that, but it also sounds great as a guitar amp. So the story behind this amp is the original Murder 1 has seen many different walks of life. It is a super bass that was also modded to have some super lead tendencies. These mixed match components allowed Lemmy to have high gain with tight punch, and he did a fantastic job. This has EL34JJ tubes and 4 inputs, and what's great about Marshalls is that you can actually slave the inputs. That's what's happening right here, is you go into channel 1, channel 2 you patch into channel 3, and that way you're getting kind of like both sides of the distortion and really enhances the sound. I love all the detail that they put into this as well with the badges and even the red bumper. If you don't know, the original Murder 1 has a red bumper because one day one of the bumpers fell off. Lemmy just needed a fix and all they had was red, and he was like, screw it. Little details like that really make the nerd in me happy. And since this was a limited run, you have some cool goodies that came with it. First, you have a COA that was both hand signed by Jim Marshall and the Lemmy. You have this really cool custom amp cover that is Motorhead and Marshall branded. Some custom picks and this really cool custom Lemmy booklet. I feel very fortunate to have this amp, so let's check it out. So I use each one of those amps in a different way. I do a lot of studio work right now, and each one of them has their own place for when I'm looking for something. For an example, I've never used the Tone Master for a guitar solo. That doesn't mean I never will use it for a guitar solo, it's just not how I've used it so far. When you do a lot of work in the studio, you're always searching for that one sound, and luckily I kind of know what each amp gets me, so when I'm looking for that sound, I just grab that amp. That's also why I don't have any duplicates of the amps. I've thought about getting another Mesa dual rec that's one for the road, one for the studio, and the two don't have to ever cross paths. However, I'm kind of more interested in getting something different, like an Orange or a Victory or an EVH. There's so many great amps out there. Leave a comment below of what your favorite amp is and what you're hoping to get next. Cheers.